We're glad you could join us. Welcome to the TxVSN Online Learning Conference. We're glad you could join us for this premium hands-on lab, Creating Accessible Word and PDF Documents, presented by Jared Smith of WebAIM. The session will run until 12:30 p.m. Central Time. I'm your host, Kayla Platt. Our facilitators are Jo Claire Hall and Alicia Rackers. Our captionist is Jean Dixie. To view the captions, open to the Windows tab at the upper left and select Show Closed Captioning, or use hotkey control F8. Sign language interpretation is provided by Hired Hands. Please notice the participant window on the left of your screen. Here you'll find the buttons to raise your hand, respond to polling, and use emoticons. The chat window is where you can ask questions during the presentation. Please note that moderators will be able to view all chat comments. Finally, the talk button in the upper left section of your screen can be used if you have a microphone and there is an opportunity to use it during the presentation. It will be blue when your microphone is live. And now, I'm going to hand it over to our presenter, Jared.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for that introduction. I'm Jared Smith from WebAIM. WebAIM stands for Web Accessibility in Mind. We're a nonprofit web accessibility consultancy based at the Center for Persons with Disabilities at Utah State University. And we do web accessibility. We've been doing web accessibility work since 1999 and have helped hundreds of clients from all over the world to help them make their web content more accessible. So I'd invite you to check out our website at webaim.org. There's a lot of materials, resources, and information online that may be helpful to you in your web accessibility efforts. Today we're going to be talking about accessible Word and PDF documents. If you do have Microsoft Word and a little bit later Acrobat Professional, you're welcome to follow along, and there are some couple hands-on activities that we'll be engaging in. I would invite you, if you do have questions now, go ahead and post those down in the chat window, and we'll keep an eye on those as they come in, and then we'll also have an opportunity as we go for you to post questions via voice if you'd like to do that. So at any time, just jump in with any questions you might have. We're going to first start talking about accessible Microsoft Word documents. It's important to note that there are a lot of different versions of Microsoft Word, and increasingly so as time goes on. There seems that there are new versions coming out all the time. And I'm going to primarily use Word 2013 for the examples and screenshots, but just know that most every version more recent than Word 2010 is very similar. The menus might look slightly different. They might be in slightly different locations, but generally the functionality is very similar. Now, do also keep in mind that if you're using Word 2016 for Mac, that it does have limited accessibility support, both for authoring and creating the accessibility, and also for the end user accessibility. There just is not yet good accessibility support for, say, a screen reader user accessing Word content on a Mac. And that's unfortunate, and it is something that Microsoft and Apple have indicated that they'll be addressing in hopefully the near future. For instance, Word 2016 for Mac does not have an accessibility checker, but they've announced just in the last week or two that that functionality will be added, and additional accessibility support is coming by the end of the year. So that will be good if there are any of you that are using a Mac. With that said, most everything that we'll be doing today you will be able to do using a Mac, with the exception of the accessibility checker. I also want to point out these accessibility cheat sheets. These cheat sheets were created by a partner of WebAIM, the National Center on Disability and Access to Education. or NCDAE. And this project is a partner project with WebAIM, and they've created many accessibility resources, primarily focused on higher education. But they have generated these cheat sheets for Microsoft Word, for PDF, for general web accessibility, for evaluation. And Alicia just posted the URL there in the chat window. If you want to check those out, there are some there for various versions of Microsoft Word that may be of help to you. Now, if you are going to be using Microsoft Word, very often we use Microsoft Word to post content online. Now, HTML is the standard format for web content, and it has much more accessibility support than Microsoft Word does. If you want content online and you want it to be optimally accessible, HTML is the best choice. Now, Microsoft Word has some support for accessibility, but it really is quite limited. So we really recommend using HTML if your native format, what you're looking to do is put content online. We do, however, understand that there are some difficulties in using HTML and authoring and the knowledge required there, especially for less technical folks. So Word does provide, excuse me, it does provide some good options and some support for accessibility. So just some general thoughts there, just making sure that we're using the right format for the right job. And if it's going online, HTML is just so much better than Microsoft Word is or probably ever will be. Okay, so getting into some of the details of what you can do in Microsoft Word for accessibility. Probably the primary thing and the most important thing that you can do for accessibility is to use headings. In Microsoft Word, these are called styles, which is a little interesting, but there's a styles panel or styles pane within Microsoft Word. And within it, several of the options are for headings, heading 1, heading 2, and heading 3. What headings do is allow you to define a structure for your document. You're probably like me. When I come to a very long web page, I usually scroll really fast and I look for big, bold text. The bigger and bolder that text, the more important it is. I know that the big, bold text at the beginning of the main content tells me what that document is about. I then look for subheadings and then maybe sub-subheadings below those. And that heading structure quickly gives me an idea of what the content and structure of that document is. I can do that very quickly simply by scrolling and scanning for that big, bold text. And by using proper headings in Word, we can create that structure, but not only visually for sighted users, meaning that a first level heading would be bigger than, I say, a second level heading or heading 2, and that would be bigger than a subheading below that of heading 3. But by using these styles, not only do we create that big, bold text, but we provide semantics or meaning to those headings that can then be utilized by screen reader users and by keyboard users in navigating the page. So a screen reader user can't visually scan and look for that big, bold text, but by using proper styles, using the styles panel, as opposed to simply selecting our text and changing the visual appearance of it, increasing the text size or making it bold, there's no semantics or meaning when we do that. The user can then navigate by that heading, by those headings. They can quickly get an idea of what the structure of that document is. Another added advantage of using the styles panel is that we can modify the visual appearance of those styles, and those changes will be immediately reflected throughout our document. So for instance, if we have a heading 1 at the beginning of our document that identifies what that content is about. And we typically recommend heading 1 per document, and typically at the beginning of the page. And then you have heading 2 for each of your main sections within that document, and then heading 3 below those if you have subsections below those. If you use the Styles panel, beyond those semantics and the navigation functionality provided to users, if you decide that you want to change your heading to visual presentation, say from blue text to red text, you can easily change that in the Styles panel, and it will be reflected immediately upon all of the heading 2s within your document. So you don't have to go back and find all of those headings and modify their visual appearance directly. You can change it in one place and it'll be reflected. That's really the power of styles in Word, and so a lot of power that comes by using headings and styles within Microsoft Word. Now, as you're creating this document structure, we don't recommend that you skip heading levels. Generally, you'd begin your document with one single heading 1. This is what the document is about. This is what its title is. Now, one thing to note there, you will notice on the Styles panel that there is a title style. It's actually on the screenshot there on the screen. On the right, there's a title style. That can also be used for the document title, the big bold text generally at the very beginning of your document. We do, however, generally recommend using heading 1 instead for that title. It sounds a little bit weird. The difference or difficulty is that if you were to take that Word document and convert it to HTML or to save it as PDF, there really is no equivalent semantics for title in HTML or in PDF. And so that main title in some ways becomes lost. It's just big bold text. So that's one reason why we recommend starting with the heading 1 as opposed to the title style. Now, if you're staying within Microsoft Word, you're not going to convert to HTML or to PDF, then it doesn't really matter. You could have your title be the title style, and then your primary headings, heading 1, and subheadings, heading 2, and so forth. So you don't want to skip heading levels. What that means is that, say, if you start with a heading 1, you don't want your next heading within the document to be a heading 3. You would always have a heading 2, and then that heading 2 really describes that section, and then within it you could have subheadings that are a heading 3. So as you look down your document, you wouldn't ever want to jump or skip over a heading level, say from a heading 1 to a heading 3 or a heading 2 to a heading 4. Because those headings describe a section and create this structure for your document, it just doesn't really make sense to skip over. Now, if you don't like the visual appearance of, say, a heading 2 and you want it to be smaller visually, don't just make it a heading 3, change the visual appearance of the style. And again, that will reflect immediately upon all of the heading 2s within your document. You can also use shortcut keys in Microsoft Word. On Windows, it's Control-Alt-1 to identify text as being a heading 1 or style it as being a heading 1. Control-Alt-2 or Control-Alt-3 for second or third level headings. Now, there are in the headings panel or headings pane, there are styles for heading 4, heading 5, and heading 6, but there are not equivalent shortcut keys for those, only for first, second, and third level headings. So that's an easy way to define these using the keyboard, is to simply hit that shortcut key. And there's an equivalent on Mac. I think it's, I should have put it in here. I think it's Command-Control 1. Maybe at the break I'll look real quick and verify what that shortcut key is, and I'll tell you. So if there are any questions to this point on headings, please feel free to post those into the chat window. Probably the next most important thing after using proper headings is to add alternative text for images. So a blind user that's using a screen reader, that technology cannot analyze an image and determine what the content of that image is. So you must provide alternative text for any images within your document. Two key words to remember when you're authoring alternative text are content and function. What is the content of that image, and if it is a link, you can click on it. What is the function of that image? Generally within Word, we usually don't have linked images, ones that you can click on. So content is really what we're going to be focusing on. What's the content that's being conveyed by that image? And that alternative text, if we author that and add it within Microsoft Word, it will be read by a screen reader in place of the image. So as a blind user is reading through the document, it would read that alternative text for the image. And if you do things correctly, it will also remain intact when you export that document to PDF or to HTML or to other formats. Unfortunately, this doesn't yet, at least the last time I tested, work in online versions like Office 365. Unfortunately, that you can add alternative text, but very often that text is not kept intact when you convert to other formats. There were a couple things in the chat window. I want to catch those real quick. Alicia asks, I sometimes have difficulty with the accessibility reading my headings as too long. Is there a solution for that? That's a good question. I think you would want to have your heading text be descriptive of a particular section, but also generally succinct. What you wouldn't want to, you want a screen reader to read the text that's visible on the page, and so if your heading visually is long, fairly lengthy, don't worry about that. You would want the equivalent experience for a screen reader user. And then there was the comment, obviously shortening the heading, but often that doesn't work either, but sometimes the accessibility checker doesn't say the heading is too long. Conundrum. Yeah, I'm not sure on the accessibility checker. There may be something in there that's indicating it's too long. I guess too long is fairly subjective. How long is too long? I don't know of any technical standard for that. So I think the general principle of being descriptive yet succinct, and yes, I understand maybe those are a little bit at odds, for your heading text would be appropriate. Interestingly, the exact same principle applies to alternative text. You want the alternative text to be descriptive of the content of that image, but also relatively succinct. When I use that word content, that does not mean a description of what the image looks like. It's really the content of that image. And there is a little bit of a difference there. Very often, for alternative text, we add lengthy descriptions of what it looks like. We describe colors and visual presentation, things that aren't really, maybe are not necessary. Again, focusing on content is really going to be most valuable. Now, to add alternative text, generally, the method for adding alternative text is different in almost every version of Word. And that's unfortunate, makes it a little bit difficult. The menus are just in different places to do this. I'm going to cover the primary and most common versions right now. But in Word 2010, you would right-click on the image and select Format Picture. And then there's an option down the left-hand side for Alt Text, Alt meaning alternative. And then it will present two fields for alternative text. There's a title field and a description field. Based on what I just said 1 minute ago, that you would not want the alternative text to be a description of what the image looks like, you would naturally assume that you should add your alternative text to the title field within this box. But that is not correct. You always want to add your alternative text to the description field in Microsoft Word. Now, if you add it to the title field, it generally would be read by a screen reader within Microsoft Word, but that title text generally does not carry over to other versions, formats, if you were to convert it. So always use the description field. You would not want to add any text to that title field. In Word 2000, okay, so Joe asked the question, can you leave the title field blank? Yes, absolutely. You just put, you wouldn't put any text within that. There are some older recommendations and articles that suggested things like putting a blank space or something in that field, or even in the description field if it's, say, a decorative image. You don't want to do that. If you don't want the image to have alternative text, again, meaning it's decorative, it doesn't have content, or maybe if the content of that image is somewhere in the context of that image, say an image with a caption immediately below it, you usually wouldn't want to put that same caption text in alternative text, or the screen reader will read it twice. In those cases, just leave these fields blank. You just don't need to add alternative text. Another little note here, if you copy an image from online, say from a web page, and paste it into Microsoft Word, or click and drag it into Microsoft Word, very often it will add the image file name in this description field. So, it might say, jaredphoto.jpg. That file name very often is not going to be good alternative text. So just keep that in mind. You'll want to check all of your images and make sure that they have good descriptive alternative text in the description field within this dialog. In Word 2013 and 2016, it's very similar, but you would right-click on the image, select Format Picture, and then there's an option across the top, a little icon for Layout and Properties. You would click on it. You would then expand the Alt Text field or option within that little dialog. And as before, you would add that alternative text to the description field, not to the title field. So with that, we're going to do our first activity. There's a URL there on the screen. I think someone will probably post it to chat here momentarily, where you can download a basic Word file. Within that Word document, there are some instructions and content to have you go through the document and add headings in the appropriate places, and alternative text to images within that Word document. If you want, you can use those keyboard shortcuts to define those headings. As soon as you've done that within the document, you can also go through and change the heading styles. Now, this is done in the Headings pane or Headings panel. That can be activated in Microsoft Word. There's an option in the Home tab at the top. There's an option for Styles pane. I think you can also activate it just by clicking on any of the styles themselves. There's an option to right-click and select Modify. I want you to modify those styles. So change the heading to style, so maybe it's bigger or a different color. There are also themes within the Styles panel that you can choose and modify the actual whole theme of the styles that you're using. So I want you to go and explore those a little bit, and if you get that far, you can add additional headings and maybe take your own images, insert them into the document, copy and paste them, or do insert and then select image, and add those into the document and add alternative text. Michelle has the question. It says, can you have it in the title field as well? We did both. Do we need to go back and delete from the title field? Okay, so my understanding is that if you add that alternative text to both title and description, if those are identical, they generally will not be read, meaning read twice. It will only read that text one time in Microsoft Word. If there's a discrepancy, any difference between title and description, then it may read them both within Microsoft Word when you're reading it with the screen reader. When you convert to another format, say PDF or HTML, again, the title text is generally lost. Only the description would carry over, so that would not be an issue. So I would probably just recommend the description filled. If you already have a lot of documents with title and description, I believe as long as they're identical, there likely is not going to be any difficulty there. It probably is not going to read that text twice. It's a little bit hard to say that definitively because there are so many versions of Word and so many different types of screen readers that I haven't tested all of them to know, but that's my understanding. Michelle also asked about PowerPoint, and we'll be covering PowerPoint and what we can do there momentarily. The short version for right now is that for alternative text, you can add the alternative text the same way, and the same guidelines apply as in Microsoft Word as to PowerPoint when it comes to alternative text. Okay, so I'm going to stop, turn it over to the moderators. We'll take about 10 minutes for this activity.
Okay, I'm going to split everyone into groups, so just give me a second, and then moderators, and we'll pull you into the groups after that. So hang on. Okay, I think everyone's back. Jared?
Okay. If there were any questions about that activity, feel free to post those into the chat now. And I will leave some time at the end if there are other questions about Word or PDF accessibility in general. Otherwise, we will continue on with a few more things with Microsoft Word. Some recommendations. One is you want to use true columns rather than the tab key if you're trying to define columns. Very often we have content that's left and right aligned. And so you want to use the True Columns feature under Page Layout on the ribbon at the top of the Word window. And then select columns to select multiple columns. So that will ensure that the reading order is correct. It will read down, say, the left-hand column and then the right-hand column, as opposed to reading, back and forth between the two columns. Marie Claude has the question, can you show me an example of a finished alt text for images, please? That's a good question. Maybe if we have time, we can go back to the actual examples there in the document and review the alternative text. One thing I would recommend if you want a little more insight into good alternative text is to read the article on the WebAIM site. There's an article on alternative text directly that goes into the proper approach for understanding alternative text, what good alternative text is, and it's quite extensive, so it's probably what I would recommend. Oh, and then your comment, your word was too old, couldn't see it. Yeah, that may be the case if you have a very old version of Word. It may actually be in a different place. If you do have Word, I believe it's 2008 or maybe 2007. I can't remember the exact number. Yeah, Word 2007. Yes, there we go. Yes, the Alt Text tab is under the Size option. So right-click and you would go to the Size option for the image, because that makes a lot of sense to put alternative text in the Size options for an image. But that's where Microsoft put it. So yeah, that should be there in that version. Okay, moving on. You would also want to use true lists. Lists, I mentioned before with headings that there's semantics or meaning with headings. It's not just big, bold text, but there's meaning. This is the first level heading. This is the second level heading, and so forth. The same thing happens with lists. If you have a numbered list, that's an ordered list. There's meaning to that. Here's a group of items that where there's a hierarchy or order. Unordered lists or bulleted lists, here's a group of items that have a parallel structure, meaning you could reorder them and it won't affect the meaning. So using those true list types is going to be much better than simply, say, typing the number 1 and then some text and hitting enter, then typing the number 2 and adding some text, or using some sort of character or glyph for those elements. For those bullets. Now, Word may automatically create lists. If you type number 1 and then some text and hit enter, generally it will assume you're creating a list and will automatically make that an ordered list. So lists are also really important for accessibility. When a screen reader encounters a list, it will indicate the type of list and generally the number of items within that list. So that can really help a screen reader user get an idea of what they're interacting with. If you're adding a link within a Word document, say a link to some web page, generally what you do is you would just copy and paste or type out that URL, the http:// directly into the Word document. And that's generally best to have that full URL presented if you're going to print that document. It allows the user, even in print, to see that full URL, and then they can type it back into their web browser. But if the document really is intended to be online only, the user probably isn't going to print it. You can create more user-friendly text for those links rather than having the full URL, especially for very lengthy URLs. Having actual user-friendly descriptive text for that link is going to be best. You can do that by selecting the hyperlink in Microsoft Word, right-clicking and selecting Edit Hyperlink. There's also a shortcut key of Control-K to edit that hyperlink. And then there's an option at the top of that Edit Hyperlink dialog for text to display. So, if you're linking to, say, the TxVSN homepage, rather than having the full URL, you could put in the link into the page, edit it using this menu, and change the text to TxVSN or TxVSN homepage, or something that's a little more usable for the user as opposed to http:// and the full URL. Also very helpful for really for usability for everyone, and to have a screen reader read that full URL can very often be somewhat burdensome. Also, in more recent versions of Microsoft Word, there is an accessibility checker that's built in. It is somewhat limited in what it can do, and all automated accessibility checkers are quite limited in what they can do. But it can help address very apparent or significant accessibility issues within your document. You can activate this by, if your document is open in Word, you can select File, Info, and then there's an option to check for accessibility. and you can activate that. Word will then analyze the document and present accessibility errors, things that it knows need to be addressed, accessibility warnings, things that might be an issue that you should look at, and also some accessibility tips on how to make that document more accessible. So this is a great resource and tool that can be used. A few other principles for Word and document accessibility. You want to ensure that your font size is sufficient. Generally, 12 points or larger. Everybody struggles in reading small text. You want to make sure there's sufficient contrast. If you're changing the colors within the document, ensure that there's sufficient contrast between the foreground color and the background color. It's a little bit difficult to measure this in Microsoft Word as opposed to, say, a web page, because with Word there's not real I guess defined color values that you can evaluate. But use some common sense. Just make sure there's sufficient contrast. You don't want to use color as the only way to convey content or meaning. The items in this list that are red have a particular meaning, for example. You would want to provide a table of contents, especially for very long documents. And this is another added advantage of using the headings within the Styles panel to identify your heading or document structure. If you do that, Word can automatically generate a table of contents at the beginning of the document, and that will be based on that heading structure. And it's really pretty cool to do this. It creates a table of contents where each of the headings are presented. They are presented as links, so the user can activate those links and jump directly to that section of the document. It will indent sections within that table of contents based on your heading structure. So heading 2s will be slightly indented, and heading 3s indented even more, and that can automatically be updated when you change your heading. So if you change your heading text or change your heading structure, the table of contents can then be updated to reflect that. Can save you a lot of work if you're trying to create a table of contents as opposed to doing that manually. You want to use good, simple language and a whole lot more. There's much more to accessibility of content that's relevant to Microsoft Word. You just want to make sure that it's nice and usable and accessible to all of your users. A couple other odds and ends. If you're saving that Word document to HTML, there are a couple options. One is that you can simply copy and paste the text into some other, say, HTML editor, and then add back in the things like headings and alternative text. That can be an awful lot of work to do that. Word does provide an option to save as web page. If you do this, in the File menu, you'll select Save as Web Page. You want to select the option for Web Page Filtered. There's two options. I think the primary one is Web Page Full or just Web Page. You want to select Web Page Filtered. It creates a much cleaner version of that HTML document. If you're using other types of conversion programs that say automatically take a Word document and generate a web page out of it, or maybe even a PDF document out of that Word document, just keep in mind that many of them, maybe most of them, will lose that accessibility information. So things like headings, things like alternative text may be lost in that conversion process. Now, if you are saving to PDF, you want to use, as much as you can, you want to use Adobe's PDF Maker add-on. So this is something that's added into Microsoft Word if you install Adobe Acrobat Professional, and it will present options for under the File menu to save as Adobe PDF, or it creates a little Acrobat icon in the ribbon or menu at the top of Microsoft Word. You want to use those options. That will ensure that the accessibility information is maintained in that Word document when it's converted to PDF. There is an option in the settings for this to, it's called Enable Accessibility and Reflow with Tagged Adobe PDF. We'll talk about what Tagged PDF means in just a couple minutes. But you want to make sure that that's selected. It is by default. If for some reason that has become unselected or deselected, then the accessibility information will be lost. You can also, if you don't have Adobe Acrobat Professional, you can also select File, Save As, and select PDF, and the accessibility information will remain in that document. Now, in this, as soon as you do File, Save As, and select PDF, there is an option in the settings there for document structure tags for accessibility. As before, you want to make sure that that is enabled to maintain that accessibility information. What you do not want to do is select print to PDF. Do File, Print, and then select an option for PDF. Essentially what that does is it almost like tapes a picture of your document. So all of that underlying semantics or markup for headings, alternative text, and so forth would then be lost from the document. So never do a print to PDF if you want to maintain that accessibility information. And of course you do. So with that, we're going to, let's see, there's a question here. That step to maintain tag structure is always the one I miss when I save as PDF. It's an important step. Thank you, Alicia. It is a very important step. Now, by default, those options are enabled, but as long as you go through that correct process for exporting or saving to PDF, then you should be good with the default settings. Okay, we're now going to take about 15 minutes for our second activity. This is a separate document. It's just been posted into the chat. This document has some accessibility issues. I would invite you to open it, run the accessibility checker. Now, if you have an older version of Microsoft Word, it may not be there. Again, it's under File, Info, and then there's the option there to check for accessibility. And it will prompt you. You'll walk through the accessibility checker process and then add in the accessibility information as it instructs you. And then when you're done, if there's some time left, I'd invite you to open some of your own Word documents that you may have on your computer and run the accessibility checker on them and see what types of accessibility issues that it may identify and fix them as you go. And then we'll come back in about 15 minutes and move on quickly to PowerPoint and to PDF documents.
Okay, we're going to split out into groups, and a couple of people had mentioned that they didn't hear anything in the groups, and if no one's talking in the groups, then no, you won't hear anything in the groups. But the small groups are meant to give you a smaller network where you can open up your mic and talk to your little group and talk to your group leader and ask questions and share your experiences and ask for help as you're going along in the activity that Jared put on the slide. So we're going to break out again, and hopefully you'll go to the same groups that you were in before. So just give me a second, and then Kayla's getting the timer ready. All right, everyone, welcome back to the main room. Heard some good discussion going on. Heard one interesting question about possibly teaching styles to your high school students so they can start getting used to using it. And I think that's a great idea.
Yes, welcome back, and I absolutely agree. Styles in Word they're awesome. I mean, they really do save you a lot of time. So if you're teaching Word at all, I think that should be a core part of what's being taught in the authoring of Word documents. Okay, if there are any questions, please go ahead and post those down in the chat. Otherwise, we're going to continue on for the remaining part here, and I'll leave a couple minutes at the end for any questions. I want to talk about PowerPoint real quickly. Accessibility in PowerPoint is quite limited. There's just not a lot that you can do. You do want to use the standard slide layouts or templates. The primary issue with PowerPoint accessibility is reading order. If you think of PowerPoint slides, they can have various layouts and text above or below, things floating to the side. It can be difficult to define a good reading order for content within those slides. If you use the standard slide layouts, that reading order will be defined, and it will generally follow the visual presentation order, left to right, top to bottom. Now, you can add alternative text in PowerPoint. You do so the same way as you would in Microsoft Word. But that's really pretty much it. You do want to be careful when adding things like text boxes or inserting images, again, because it's difficult to define the reading order for those. If you select a slide layout or template that has those types of things, say a layout that has a place for an image, then that reading order will be properly defined. There is, in PowerPoint 2010 and newer, there is an accessibility checker. Again, somewhat limited in what it can identify, mostly because it's pretty limited what you can actually add when it comes to accessibility in PowerPoint. If you do want to create a PowerPoint that's going to go online, we do not recommend doing the Save as Web Page feature. It's almost entirely inaccessible. The controls, the content that are created just are not accessible at all. Probably the best way to get your PowerPoint file online is to export to a PDF document, again, using the same procedures we talked about before. You don't want to do file print to PDF. And then going into the PDF document and adding in that accessibility information. Alicia had a question. We had a couple of questions in our group. One, is there an editing feature for hyperlinked in Word 2007? Oh boy, that's a long time ago. I believe so. I believe there's an option in there to change the text. In 2007, I don't even have 2007 to verify it, whether that's the case. I maybe, okay, Joe Clare says yes. I would suspect there is. I'm pretty sure that there is that option. It may be in a slightly different place than newer versions. And then the question, is there an available accessibility checker for Mac? And no, there is not. At the beginning I mentioned that has been announced, that it will be added to Word for Mac by the end of the year. Okay, and then so you want to know if there's title, not titled, but words displayed. Yeah, there should be that option in 2007. Again, that's a long time ago, so I'm not really sure. Okay, good questions. I'm going to move on and talk about PDF accessibility. There also, like Word, there are a lot of different versions of Acrobat that can create PDF documents. We're going to primarily focus on Acrobat 11. It does seem to be the most commonly used version still. Acrobat DC is the most recent version. That's Acrobat Document Cloud. It does add accessibility support for Mac, which is new. If you are on a Mac, just not a lot you can do in Acrobat Professional for accessibility unless you go to DC. It also enhances screen reader support within Acrobat. So if you're on a Mac, PDF documents can start to have some accessibility and just more usable. But just keep in mind, regardless of the version of that you're working with, you must have Acrobat Professional if you're going to modify accessibility information. That's also applicable to Acrobat DC. You must have the professional version if you're going to make any changes or additions to accessibility within PDF documents. As before, HTML is always going to be more accessible. If your target is the web, it has better accessibility support than PDF, but PDF documents do have better accessibility support than Word documents or PowerPoint files, and those formats generally have better accessibility support than pretty much anything else that you might post online. One exception to that is, as I mentioned, PowerPoint slides. If they're going to be online, generally exporting the PDF and then adding in or fixing the accessibility in the PDF document will usually be better than simply posting the PowerPoint file, or more especially saving the PowerPoint file as HTML within PowerPoint. So a few principles about PDF accessibility. PDF is a format, just like Doc is a format for Word documents. So Acrobat Reader will read the PDF documents. Acrobat Professional is usually necessary for editing accessibility within those PDF documents. You always want to start with the most accessible document possible in Word or InDesign or whatever program you're using. This is a critical step. You must start with accessibility in those source documents and then save to PDF appropriately. That'll just give you so much more of a head start with accessibility. It's easier to add that accessibility in Microsoft Word. While it's limited in what it can do, it's much easier to do it there than it is to recreate all of that accessibility within Acrobat Professional. If you do simply have a scan of a document, or say a photo of a document, if it's not true text, you must run OCR, which is optical character recognition, on that document to generate text. If the document is not actual true text, it will not be accessible. You have to have a document that has a base of true text. Michelle asked, do you have a recommendation for a good OCR program? The one that comes with Acrobat Professional is very, very good. Probably, at least initially, I just recommend Acrobat Professional because it will do the OCR process, maintain the text directly. There are probably some others out there. I'm not that familiar with them, but I know what Acrobat Professional has is quite good. Okay, so one terminology that's used is PDF tags. So if you hear that term PDF tags, just know that tags contain the accessibility information. So if you think of a PDF document, an accessible PDF document really has two versions of that document. There's the visual presentation, what the user sees, and let's see, okay, there we go. So there's the visual presentation, and then there's an underlying tags version of that document. The tags version, or tags content within that PDF document, contains all of the text of the document and the accessibility information. You might think of it as PDF tags as being similar to HTML tags. They contain structure and markup and semantics for that document. But the tags really are invisible. They're embedded within the PDF document and really only accessible to assistive technologies such as screen readers. Now, because you really have two versions of that document, the visual version and the tags version, you can edit those independently. What that means is that editing the PDF tags usually will not change the visual presentation. You need to be a little careful with this because you can end up with two versions of the document all saved in one PDF file that can be very different. Generally, you want the tags to mirror the visual presentation. you want the screen reader experience to be very similar to the visual experience. They don't have to be identical, but you want to ensure that the accessibility is at least parallel. We want to create an equivalent experience or equivalent content. So if you hear that a PDF file is tagged, that really means that it contains text and hopefully accessible information. Now, just because it's tagged does not mean that it's accessible. It just really means that it's accessibility enabled. It has the text and the ability for the markup to support accessibility. You generally, with a tagged PDF document, will need to go through a process to ensure that the tags are correct, that the accessibility information that they contain is accurate, that it's correct, that it is representative of the visual content of that PDF document. So there are some steps. I'm going to go actually through these just very quickly. I know the slides will be available to you. They're just a little bit of a setup in Acrobat Professional just to get the accessibility tools presented within the interface. One is that you want to enable the tags pane. The tags pane will show on the left-hand side of the interface by default, and it will show you the underlying tags or structure of the document. There's a little screenshot here, and you can see within the tags panel there's an H1, there are P elements, which are paragraphs, there's a figure, which is an image, there's a table, and so you can visually see the underlying markup in that tags pane or tags panel. That also allows you to edit the accessibility information within those tags. There's also an order pane. Order allows you to define the reading order. Generally, the underlying reading order by default is going to be sufficient. It will be accessible. There are exceptions to that, however, say floated images or columns or complex layouts within a PDF document. You may need to go into the order pane and explicitly define that reading order that will be read by a screen reader. Now, there's also an option in the tags pane to enable highlight content. That's really handy. It allows you to click in the tags pane and it will highlight in the visual presentation of that document what thing you have selected. So it creates this connection between the tags pane and the visual document itself. There is in PDF an accessible wizard. You go to the Tools menu, select Action Wizard, and then Make Accessible and click Start. Very similar to Microsoft Word, it will walk you through an evaluation of that document, add accessibility information, prompt you for important accessibility information, such as alternative text for images, and it will generate a report and give you feedback about accessibility. This is something you probably should run on every PDF document just because it addresses some accessibility aspects that you can't really address in another easy way. Things like document language that are kind of embedded within the Acrobat file. The accessibility wizard or Make Accessible wizard makes it very easy to identify those issues and to address them. I already showed the tags pane. This will show you the underlying structure in the order in which it would be read by a screen reader. You can edit that information within the tags pane. You can change the structure of the document, say make a paragraph an H2 or second level heading, all within the tags pane. Now, if you have a document that is not tagged, meaning there is no accessibility information, there is an option to do Add Tags to Document. And Acrobat Professional will go through and analyze the document and take its best guess as to the underlying structure of that document and will automatically generate tags. But it does guess a little bit. It will, for instance, look at the size of text to determine what level of heading it thinks it probably is. Really big text, it will make an H1. Slightly smaller text, it might make an H2. It gets it wrong. Okay, so you may need to, if you don't have tags, you're going to need to add those tags and then go back and fix them and make them appropriate. Again, if you start with an accessible source document, say in Microsoft Word, and export correctly, the tags will be there by default, and things like alternative text, heading structure will be appropriate. They will already be reflected in the tags pane. There's another tool called the Touch-Up Reading Order tool. It's a little bit of a misnomer. It says Touch-Up Reading Order, but you actually don't define the reading order at all within this tool. Really, the Touch-Up Reading Order tool is for changing or defining markup for particular elements. So you can click on text within your document, and then in the Touch-Up Reading Order tool, click, say, the Heading 2 button to identify it as being a heading. You can add text fills, figures, or images, and so forth. Now there is this big background button within the Touch-Up Reading Order panel. Background is for empty or decorative elements, or maybe repetitive elements that you would not want a screen reader to read. So background basically says, hide this thing from the screen reader user. There is also a button for show order panel that will show that order pane where you can define the reading order. In the Touch-Up Reading Order tool, you can click on a figure or an image within the document and right-click it and select Edit Alternative Text, and that is how you would add alternative text. You can also add it in the Tags pane by clicking on a figure, right-clicking, and selecting alternative text. So that's how you would add it in Acrobat Professional. There's a table editor. And table editor for data tables allows you to define row and column headers and other accessibility information that might be necessary. Hey, a few little odds and ends with PDF accessibility. If you're dealing with forms, you can add labels in the Forms editor in Acrobat Professional, or you can use a totally different tool called Adobe Lifecycle Designer. And Lifecycle Designer is for creating forms for PDF. Unfortunately, the accessibility between Acrobat Professional and Lifecycle Designer are not compatible. So you need to use one or the other. You can define what's called the role mapping. If you're using other types of programs to create PDF documents, you can define a mapping so the accessibility information is not lost when you create a PDF document or import a document into Acrobat Professional. You do probably want to test with a screen reader. Unfortunately, testing of accessibility for PDF documents is quite limited. So to ensure the end user experience is positive, testing in a screen reader, especially a Windows screen reader, is going to be necessary. On a Mac, PDF accessibility, again, is quite limited. And we do have articles on our website for getting started with testing for the primary screen readers. We also have articles and cheat sheets for PDF and Word accessibility that go into quite a lot of depth, and those are all on our website at webaim.org. So with that, I will say thank you, and we'll take any questions if you'd like to either jump in with voice or post them into the chat window.
Thank you so much, Jared, for all this great information. Thank you for attending this session, and thank you to Jared for sharing your expertise. To receive your continuing professional education credits for attending this session, fill out the survey posted on the conference homepage, conference.txvsn.org. Your CPA certificates will be emailed to you within 2 weeks. To access the recording of this session, please visit the Conference tab on the conference homepage and click on View Recorded Sessions. Transcripts of each session will be posted there as well. The next session will be at 12:45 p.m. Central, entitled Creating Collaborative Classrooms, Peer Buddies and Group Projects. Thank you for attending the TxVSN Online Learning Conference. We hope you join us for next year's conference scheduled for June 21st through the 23rd of 2017.